Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Konstakademien. My name is Lizzie Shea. Very nice to see so many of you this evening here. We are extremely happy for this cooperation with Manta Ray Film. When Stina Gardell contacted me was last spring and asked for cooperation on arranging a screening and a talk in respect to this film. Of course, I asked her why Jewish culture in Sweden, what is the connection, and I found out very fast why. And I'm gonna say a couple of words before I leave the stage. I just want to say that Stig Bjo is going to join us after the screening. Just some logistics. The film is 90 minutes, after which Svante Weiler will have a 30-minute talk with Joyce Carol Oates. She unfortunately could not join us. The plan was for her to be here, but it didn't work out. She's teaching, and it was difficult for her to travel right now. And also Ylva Swedenborg, who is was helping with Stina in producing this film, will join us later on. But now, before I leave, I want to say, so what's in it for us? And why would you, Diskutuisve, arrange such a screening 3 days after the film opened in the theaters? Of course, Joyce Carol Oates is a fantastic, wonderful author, but the connection deserves a film on its own. It comes across in a small episode in this film, this fantastic film that Stig did, that spans over her life and literature, but there is a tiny episode that reveals why we do it. And that episode, I told Stig, I encouraged him to do a film just about that point, because Joyce Carol Oates will speak about her grandmother, the grandmother that bought her books at the age of 8 and bought her books on every birthday and every holiday in a town in upstate New York where nobody read books, in a town where nobody finished high school, nobody even went to high school. That grandmother was living 7 miles away and were buying books, and later on paid for the girls' piano lessons and music books. She bought her an Olivetti typewriter, and when she became older, she got her a library card. Nobody in the family had a library card, and she was taking her to the library, the children's library. She encouraged her to write. She paid for her studies later on when she went to college. And just before I came here today, Joyce sent a mail to Svante and me with the speech that she gave at the Jerusalem Book Festival. The speech is long, so I'm not going to, of course, recite it, just a couple of lines from it. From the first, my grandmother encouraged my writing and my intention of becoming a teacher. When I began to publish stories in literary magazines and even to win awards, she said, I knew you could do it. It was not until after her death that we came to realize how little we knew my grandmother, how little she spoke about herself. Only when a biographer began to research my family's background was it revealed that Blanche Morgenstern was the daughter of a Jewish family who immigrated in the 1890s to upstate New York to a small city called Lockport, where there were no other Jews, no Jewish culture, indeed, very little culture at all. Fortunately, there was a public library. And this is the Jewish connection. Enjoy the evening.
Dear Joyce Carol Oates, welcome to Jewish culture in Sweden.
Hello. Hello.
Well, thanks for being able to be with us after having seen Stig's film about you. I don't know if Stig is here. has he come so we can say thank you to him as well? Okay, he would be coming. Since it is Jewish culture talking to you and you're appearing in front of Jewish culture, let's go for Grandma Blanche Morgenstern right away. There's a million other questions one would like to ask you, but tell us a little bit more about Blanche Morgenstern.
Well,
What did she look like? That's the picture of her. Tell us your childhood remembrance of her.
I keep this photograph right about 2 feet away on my windowsill. So my grandmother was probably the greatest influence in my life. When I was a little girl, I just took her for granted, I suppose. It sounds amazing now, but she was such a wonderful person. I think when we're young children, we take so much for granted. It's only when we're older that we realize what treasures we may have in our families, and we don't really know it at the time. But anyway, my grandmother, as I probably said in the film, she took me for my first library card. She walked with me into the library, and we got a little children's card, my first library card of my life. My grandmother was the one who read books, and she bought books for me and gave books to me, and also to my brother. And she was an influence on our lives of an intellectual sort. We lived on a farm, a small farm in Western New York, and we did not have any books. And it was not a cultured household. There was a good deal of work. If you know farm life, you know that everybody works, including children. So I worked a lot, but my grandmother lived in the city. It was not a large city, but to us it was very large, like a metropolis. She was more sophisticated, she dressed very well. She was just different from the other grandmothers out in the country. She was very different. I did not know why. Later on, I think I understood, but at the time, I didn't.
Did she ever tell you why she wanted you to read so much? Were you her project?
Oh, I don't think that we ever talked about that. It was just that we did. I mean, she was always reading library books. She encouraged me to be a writer. She bought me a toy typewriter when I was very young. I don't know whether they exist anymore. A toy typewriter was like just a little typewriter for a child. So she was obviously, encouraging me to be a writer, but she never said that. And then when I was in high school, she bought me a typewriter.
Were you ever embarrassed by it? Because, as you said, the surroundings were not so literary. No books at all. Were you ever embarrassed by her sort of pointing at you, I have ambitions for you, Joyce?
Oh, no, I don't think the people on the farm, I don't think the people I don't think they knew her. I mean, she lived in the city. No, not at all, no.
Did you ever reflect on her name, Blanche, at the time Morning Star? Did you ever hear that it had been Morgenstern?
Well, I have to say that we lived in a part of the world that was not at all Jewish. I think I don't know the story of my grandmother's life. I wrote a novel called The Gravedigger's Daughter, which is actually about her, but it's speculating why my grandmother's family came to upstate New York when they might have stayed in New York City. They might have lived among other Jewish people in a community and had a kind of communal neighborhood unity of, I don't know why they came to upstate New York, which in those days was very far away. It would be hard to get to. I mean, I don't even know if there were trains up there, around.
And you never asked her anything about her life? You weren't a curious child, weren't you?
Children are not like that.
Some are.
well, my father would have been the one to ask her. He was her son. He didn't ask her. Or if he did ask her, I don't know what the answer was. But when my grandmother was very young, I think when she was this age, she married a man named Oates, and he was Irish. He was said to be very handsome, but unfortunately, he was a heavy drinker, and he abandoned the family when my father was just a baby. So that side of the family disappeared, the whole Irish side. Now I have the name Oates, so that's the inheritance from that side of the family, but he just disappeared. So we didn't know anything about him either. My grandmother was so hurt and devastated by her husband leaving her, she would never talk about him. She absolutely never talked about him. And then in her own family, I don't know whether this is in the movie, I don't remember that it is, but it's in the novel. Her own father became very violent. He committed suicide, actually. So I think he was despairing, and I don't think my grandmother wanted to talk about that. She focused on the present. She focused on her family, my father and my mother and me, and then my brother was born. She focused on her family and living in the present. I get the impression she didn't want to look into the past.
Could you tell us a little bit how you reacted when you got to know that she was Jewish? How did that happen?
My biographer, Greg Johnson, did some research. So that just came to light. I was quite much an adult, and it was very interesting. However, it wasn't that surprising because I had always been friends with Jewish classmates at Syracuse. I was very close friends with Jewish people. I mean, there was a natural inclination and a predilection, let's say, or gravitation. So it wasn't that surprising. And then when
How did your father react? The father that never asked any questions. How did he react?
Well, I wasn't living at home then, so I mean, I was an adult woman with my marriage, so I don't really know. I suppose he was.
One would imagine it's a big thing. Being
Well,
told, well, as a matter of fact, you're a Jew.
Well, when I talked about my novel, The Gravedigger's Daughter around the United States, many people came up to me and they said, same thing in my family. I'm really Jewish, but I didn't know about it because there was no talk about it. I think the history of pogroms in Eastern Europe was so tragic and bitter, or maybe memories of the Nazis. I think many people just, in America, maybe not everywhere, but in America, they just didn't want to talk about it. But there are many secrets in families, and that was not the only secret in my family. Many things were not talked about.
So this was just one of them. A friend of mine, who is also an author, he got to know that he's Jewish at the age of 17. And today he says, the reaction was, I was connected with a fate. There was no point in discussing whether he felt Jewish or not. He was connected to a fate. He was a Pole, by the way. Have you ever felt that this connection through your grandmother connects you to the Jewish fate?
Well, probably I felt a little more intimately and directly connected with my second husband, Charlie Gross, who was Jewish. He passed away in 2019. And he was very secular, but he was also very Jewish. Charlie believed that Jews are the people who believe in social justice and in inheritance of intellectual culture and reverence for books and music and art. So Charlie's sense of being Jewish, which was secular, was what I identified with. Social justice, he thought, was very important.
All the positive traits to Jewishness.
Yes.
But did you ever get a connection to the tragic fate of the Jewish people that was connected with the Holocaust?
Oh yes, I wrote a novel called The Tattooed Girl. Probably people don't know about it. I wrote a novel called The Tattooed Girl, which is about a man who is the son of Jewish people, but his mother wasn't Jewish. So he's not exactly Jewish, but he feels that he wants to write about the Holocaust. And then it's about his relationship with the history. Even though it's not his history, he feels connected with it. Yes, I have written a good deal about those subjects. Yeah.
I would like to quote something from your autobiography, The Lost Landscape, which I've read in Swedish. So if you could, I'll read it in the Swedish translation first. It's towards the end. It's about your grandma. And then you'll have my bad retranslation into English afterwards. But I want the audience to know how you write it, not just how I retranslated it. So this is how it goes. Något som Fred Oates inte kände till var att hans morföräldrar faktiskt var tyska judar som under slutet av 1890-talet hade emigrerat till Förenta Staterna, som där hade bytt namn och med så stor framgång lyckats skaka av sig sin gamla religion och sin etnicitet att ingen kände till deras bakgrund. Och så kommer det. Det var den en gång så högt skattade traditionen vid gränslandet västerut. Detta att kunna skaka av sig sin bakgrund, att bli ingenting. Maybe you're picking up the book from the shelf. I'll give you the retranslation then if you still hear me or if you're too far away from the speaker. It would be a wonder if you could find the quote. The end of that's
The Tattooed Girl.
Yeah.
Which is very, very much about Jewish. I wrote it after 9/11. I wanted to write a novel that shows how hate speech has consequences in the real world. In other words, hatred that's manifested as language ends up with real people dying. So that was and then The Gravedigger's Daughter is particularly about my grandmother.
Yes.
As I imagined her, and I had to use a lot of imagination because, one has to imagine language and conversations and things that may have taken place, but I wasn't there.
Then I'll come back to the retranslation of the quote from The Lost Landscape, because you say something very specific there. You talk about your granny and say she sort of made use of the once so highly valued tradition at the frontier to be able to rid yourself of your background and then to become nothing. What is this? What kind of tradition, American tradition is this? To rid yourself of your background to become nothing.
Well, I don't know that she becomes nothing. It's like to make a new identity. Probably that's one of the motives for many people coming to America throughout the centuries. Coming from England originally, the Puritans were cast off. They were not considered Anglicans or Christians. They had to leave. So they went to America and had their own religion. And then other people come to America. Some people in America, they go to Alaska, or they go far, far away and have a new identity. It's because the country is so vast. In the 19th century, young men were told to go west. Go west, young man, go west. And so they would go to this wild emptiness out in the west. It's very different from living in a small country.
Do you see it as a kind of freedom to be able to rid yourself of your background? Is it a purely positive thing?
Well, those are just words. I mean, freedom is a word. You could say if you're losing a whole lot of tradition. So you're losing something, but some people don't want to be burdened by the past. They want to be free. It may depend on your experiences in a family. If the family has a kind of heaviness and you're expected to behave in a certain way, then I think young people wanted to escape and go to the West. They did. They certainly did. I mean, Our Western Frontier is a story of fairly young people leaving home and escaping. Like New England, they escaped New England and went out to California. So those are people very adventuresome, and maybe some of them were lost souls. I mean, maybe they were not happy, but that's how people are.
In the film, you say that about your grandma, that she probably made the right decision to not telling anybody about her background. What do you mean by that, the right decision?
Well, I don't think I would necessarily say that. I don't judge other people, and I don't look into motives of people. It's their own business. I think whatever she did, that's what she did. I mean, I loved her very much, but I don't pry into people's lives. My own mother and my father had very tragic early lives, but they didn't talk about that. I mean, I wouldn't make any judgment. Why say she made the right decision for her?
You said in the quote I made that it was at the time a very highly valued tradition to rid yourself of your background. What about this tradition today? We talk about identity in a totally different way today, don't we?
Oh, it depends on who you are, really. I think there are certain cliches in our culture of identification, but the media exaggerates lots of things. In the United States, there are really a small minority of people who believe certain things, really very small, but they get all the attention of the media. So if you're living in another country, you get the wrong idea. It's sort of the way the media presents things with headlines. You'd think that there was just a horrible crime wave and that horrible things were happening every minute in the United States, and it's not like that at all. I mean, I'm on social media, I'm on Twitter once, through the day, intermittently, and I can see all these scare headlines and, the world's ending and fascism is coming and so forth. But then I just got back from Seattle, so I was traveling in the United States, and once you're actually out in the world meeting people, it's kind of a different place. So, I think we have to look past the cliches of trendiness and fashion. Some people are very happy living out their tradition, their family tradition, and they are happy. And they believe the same things their parents and grandparents believe. So that makes them happy. Other people are restless and they reject it, but then maybe they come back to it when they're older. We're all different.
Well, you still teach. Your students, are they sharing your view that this is exaggerated, the whole debate on identity, the whole fuss about identity, is that exaggerated, or do they have a different opinion? They're at Princeton, they're in the center of the world, their world, anyway.
We don't talk about politics. We have work that we do in the class.
But could you escape from the theme of identity when you teach literature in Princeton? It seems, isn't that the center of the discussion?
I'm afraid you must have such a distorted idea. I've teaching students literature. We're reading the work. I have 10 students in this class. I have Asian Americans. I have Syrian Jewish refugees who went to Mexico and now are in the United States. I mean, I have every kind of student. I have Hawaiian student. I have Asian, Indian student, Indian American students. I have a great mix of students. Believe me, they're not talking about their identities. They're talking about the work that they do for the day. Now, maybe in their residences, maybe they stay up late talking about this. I don't know.
It sounds
But
like
in
a
the end-
relief because the topic is really hot here as well. Maybe it's exaggerated here as well.
Well, I
You
think- I
get the
think so.
feeling in public life that there's no way of ridding yourself of your background. There's no escape. You're bound to live with it. So that's just a modern myth.
Well, if you're studying chemistry or you're studying English literature or history, I mean, that's what you're studying. I mean, people come to a great university to learn something, not to sit around saying, I am a Native American. I mean, how many times could you say that?
Well, a couple of times.
My students are taking astrophysics, they're taking computer science. They are working very, very hard. They're serious students. Now, what you've been reading about in the newspaper or somewhere else, that may be different.
Can I come back to something you said in the film that was striking? You say, that, or it was a quote, I don't remember if you say it directly or if it was quoted by Stig, that you're not sure if you have a personality of your own. You see yourself as some kind of, almost a medium.
Oh, well,
That
I find
sounds harsh.
why do you say harsh?
It seems,
writers-
well, it seems, it's surprising. You don't hear that so often from people saying, I don't know if I have a personality.
You hear it very often in literature. John Keats said something very much like that, and I think Shakespeare kind of disappeared into his work. You don't see Shakespeare writing about himself. Shakespeare is writing about other subjects.
But is
I
that,
don't-
sorry.
I mean, it's very typical of a writer, especially a novelist, to look at society as a whole and want to express personalities different from oneself. So when I'm writing a novel, I'm not intruding in it. I'm trying to present points of view that may be different from my own. They may be antithetical to my own, but I have to be honest about the world. Stendhal said that a novel is a mirror moving along a roadway, and it shows the society of the time. That's a certain kind of novel that I identify with. A novel is social complexity. Now, when I read a memoir, of course, I'm writing about myself, but even in my memoir, I mostly read about other people. Read a lot about my parents and some friends and some professors, you know, but I'm trying to position myself as a memoirist. I would definitely have to acknowledge my own self. But when I'm writing about other subjects, I don't do that.
So one could say that you sort of enjoy this old tradition of being nothing, becoming nothing, to be able to become a writer. So that's your tradition then.
Well, I don't know why you use the word enjoy. It's just
Or
it's
use,
something that-
use, if that's more neutral.
Well, say a photographer has a camera, and the photographer looks through the lens and really delimits the world. The world is very large and chaotic, but with the lens, you have a finite view. So you are imposing that view. So that's your personality, but you're not in front of the camera. I mean, it's kind of invisible behind the scenes. So that is the strategy of the novelist also. If I write a novel about Marilyn Monroe, I cannot put in 16,000 people she met. I would have to limit myself maybe to 16 people. And Marilyn Monroe, when she was a girl, was in a number of orphanages and foster homes. Let's say 20. I only wrote about one orphanage and one foster home. She had miscarriages. I wrote about one miscarriage. So when you're a writer, you select from the confusion of the world, so much multiplicity. Most of our lives are very repetitious. So the days have a routine. But when you're writing a novel, like James Joyce's Ulysses, you just take one day, and go into it very deeply.
One last question. Will you ever come back to your beautiful grandma and write about her again? Or is she a finished chapter for you as a novelist?
I think about her a good deal, but I also feel that she's inside me. I feel that I embody her, that she's somehow not gone. I mean, partly, I mean, I look at the photograph a lot all the time, but also with my parents too. And all of those who are listening, if you're parents, you must remember that your children will embody you and carry you with them through decades. You know, long after we're gone, we live on in people's lives. So I might write about her again, but even when I don't, it's sort of from that perspective.
Well, we would like you to write about her again, and we thank you for this wonderful conversation, Joyce Carol Oates, and for giving us the portrait, or helping Stig giving us the portrait of you
Stig is
as
here,
a writer.
so-
Now Stig is here, so you have to say hello to him. Stig Bjo, the director of the film. Please give him a hand, a warm hand.
Oh,
Come and show yourself to the camera, Mr. Director. Here he is.
Hi, Joyce. Am I?
hello.
There you can.
Hello again. We meet quite often now, which is nice. Yeah. Did you hear me? Or
Yes,
yeah, I said
hope you'll come soon to Princeton.
I will, definitely. So no, it's fine. Okay.
Okay, we shan't take up much more of your time because I suppose you're writing a novel or something else that should come in print pretty soon, Joyce Carol Oates. We look forward to that novel. And your film, as you probably have heard, had a wonderful reception here in Sweden. Stig is shining from all the good reviews he's had.
I'm traveling around. I'm just back from two of the Gothenburg and Malmö, which is the third city. And yesterday I was in Uppsala, the university town, 1 hour away from Stockholm.
It's amazing. Well, I hope to come visit maybe next August. I think I'm coming.
I will, definitely.
Thanks for tonight, Joyce Carol Oates. Thank you, Stig.